The safe house was supposed to be secure. The extraction point was supposed to be clear. The 6-person Navy SEAL team was supposed to have 48 hours before enemy forces could locate them in the remote mountain region. Instead, they had 60 armed militants converging on their position from 3 directions with less than 20 minutes warning. The odds were 10 to 1 against. The situation was deteriorating by the second, and the team's only sniper, Tessa Rivera, had exactly one choice: start eliminating targets faster than they could organize an assault, or watch her teammates die in the next 30 minutes. Some snipers count their shots, others count their saves. This is the story of one woman, one rifle, and the 47 enemy combatants who learned that numbers don't matter when you're facing someone who never misses. Tessa Rivera was 29 years old and had been a Navy SEAL sniper for 6 years when everything went wrong in the Panjshir Valley region of Afghanistan. The valley itself was legendary, the same terrain where Ahmad Shah Massoud had held off Soviet forces for years, where mountains rose like walls and every village could be a fortress. It was beautiful, deadly, and currently full of people who wanted her team dead. The mission had seemed straightforward when they'd briefed it 72 hours earlier at Bagram Airfield: infiltrate a remote valley region near the Pakistan border, gather intelligence on a suspected terrorist training facility, and extract before enemy forces could respond. 6 operators, 3 days, in and out with nobody the wiser. The team was small but capable. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb led the element, 10 years of SEAL experience, 2 deployments with DevGru, the kind of operator who'd seen everything and survived it all. Chief Petty Officer James Torres handled breaching and close-quarters combat. Petty Officer First Class David Chen was their communications specialist. Petty Officer Second Class Miguel Santos ran point and handled navigation through the treacherous mountain terrain. Petty Officer Second Class Sarah Mitchell was their medic and secondary assault operator. And Tessa was their sniper, the one who saw threats before they became problems, who eliminated targets at distances the others couldn't engage, who provided overwatch that kept the team alive when everything else went to hell. Which was exactly what had just happened. They'd inserted via helicopter 3 nights ago, landing in a remote valley 15 kilometers from their target area. The infiltration had gone perfectly. No contact, no compromise, moving through terrain so rugged that most enemy forces avoided it entirely. They'd established a hide site in the abandoned shepherd's compound built into the mountainside, a structure that gave them clear sight lines to the surrounding area while remaining concealed from casual observation. The intelligence gathering had gone well. They'd identified the training facility, documented the personnel, recorded communications, and gathered enough evidence to justify a larger operation. Mission success with 48 hours remaining before their scheduled extraction. Then, their communications specialist, Chen, had intercepted enemy radio traffic that made everyone's blood run cold. "They know we're here," Chen said, his voice tight as he monitored the encrypted receiver. "I'm picking up multiple units being diverted to this valley. They're organizing a search operation. Someone compromised our position." Webb had immediately ordered the team to bug out, to move toward the backup extraction point 8 kilometers northeast. But before they could even pack their equipment, Torres, who'd been on watch at the compound's elevated position, made the radio call that confirmed their worst fears. "Contact. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south. Estimate 20-plus military-age males, armed with AKs and PKM machine guns. They're heading directly toward our position." The team had moved to defensive positions immediately, but the situation had deteriorated with terrifying speed. More enemy forces had appeared from the west, then from the north. Within 10 minutes, they were looking at an estimated 60 hostile combatants moving to surround their position from 3 directions, with more likely coming from the 4th direction, the east, where the terrain was most difficult but also where their only real escape route lay. Webb had made the tactical calculation quickly. "We can't outrun them carrying all our equipment. We make a stand here, hold them off long enough for air support to arrive. Chen, get me CAS on station ASAP, close air support. Aircraft that could drop ordnance on enemy positions and give them breathing room." But Chen's response had been the final piece of bad news. "CS is 40 minutes out minimum." Closest Apache helicopters are engaged with another operation. We're on our own until they can disengage. 40 minutes, against 60-plus enemy combatants who were currently organizing for an assault on a position they somehow knew the team was occupying. The abandoned compound was defensible, but not ideal. Stone walls provided good protection against small arms fire, but they also limited mobility and created a fixed position that could be flanked. The elevated section where Torres had been on watch gave good observation, but exposed whoever occupied it to fire from multiple directions. The main structure had limited entry points, which was good for defense, but bad if they needed to withdraw under fire. Tessa had immediately moved to the elevated position, setting up her rifle, a Mk13 Mod 7 in .300 Winchester Magnum with a Schmidt and Bender scope, with fields of fire covering the most likely approach routes. From her position, she could see approximately 270 degrees of the surrounding terrain, with ranges varying from 200 meters to over 800 meters depending on direction. The rest of the team had fortified the main compound structure, positioning themselves to cover the gaps in Tessa's coverage and to defend against any assault that made it through her fields of fire. They had ammunition for a sustained firefight, but not an indefinite one. They had some fragmentary grenades and one claymore mine. They had radio communication with higher command, but no way to accelerate the arrival of support. What they did have was Tessa Rivera with a sniper rifle, 120 rounds of match-grade ammunition, and 6 years of experience eliminating targets under the worst possible conditions. Tango units are organizing at the tree line, 600 meters south, Tessa reported calmly over the team radio net. Estimate 25 fighters. Looks like they're preparing to assault by fire and maneuver. Second group of 20 visible at the ridgeline 400 meters west. Third group approaching from north. Can't get solid count yet, but estimate another 15 to 20 inches. Copy, Webb responded. You have weapons free on any hostile that presents a threat. Make your shots count. We need to break their will to assault before they commit to a full push. Tessa's position gave her an elevated perspective of the battlefield developing around them. The southern group was the largest and most organized. They dismounted from vehicles and were clearly preparing a coordinated assault with a base of fire element and a maneuver element. The western group was moving through more difficult terrain but getting closer. The northern group was still distant, but advancing steadily. Engaging southern group, Tessa transmitted, starting with what looks like leadership elements. Through her scope, the world narrowed to magnified clarity. At 600 meters, the enemy fighters were clearly visible. Men in mixed military and civilian clothing, carrying AK-47s and PKM machine guns, some with RPGs strapped to their backs. She could see them organizing, leaders gesturing and positioning fighters for the assault. Tessa's breathing slowed to the rhythm she'd learned through thousands of hours of training and hundreds of hours of actual combat. Her heart rate dropped. The world outside her scope faded to background noise. This was the zone where great snipers operated, not rushed, not panicked, just smooth mechanical execution of trained skills. The man who appeared to be directing the southern group was gesturing to fighters on his left, positioning them for a flanking movement. He was standing partially behind a tree, but enough of his torso was visible for a shot. Tessa adjusted for the 600-meter range, for the light wind from left to right, for the slight upward angle of her position. The crosshairs settled on his center mass. She exhaled half a breath and held it. Her finger increased pressure on the trigger with smooth consistency. The rifle recoiled smoothly against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the impact. The target dropped immediately. The fighters around him scattered, looking for the source of fire they couldn't see or hear from 600 meters away with a suppressed rifle. Target down, Tessa reported calmly, already acquiring her next target. A fighter with a PKM machine gun was setting up a position behind a rock that would give him excellent fields of fire toward the compound. He was intent on his task, unaware that he was being observed. Tessa's second shot dropped him before he could bring the weapon into action. The southern group was now reacting to sniper fire, but they still hadn't located her position. They were taking cover, shouting to each other, looking in the wrong directions. Their organization was breaking down as leaders tried to figure out where the fire was coming from. Tessa shifted her attention to the Western group. At 400 meters and moving through rougher terrain, they presented more difficult shots, but they were also advancing more aggressively, probably thinking they were outside effective engagement range. A fighter was bounding forward from cover to cover, trying to close the distance. Tessa tracked his movement, predicted where he'd stop, and fired as he dove behind a boulder. He didn't make it. The round caught him mid-movement and he went down hard. Western group is 350 meters and closing, Tessa reported, engaging. The next target was setting up an RPG, the launcher visible across his back as he knelt to prepare a shot. RPGs were a serious threat to the compound's stone walls. They needed to be eliminated before they could fire. Tessa's shot was rushed by sniper standards, only 2 seconds from target acquisition to trigger press, but it was effective. The fighter with the RPG collapsed. The Western group had now identified her general position and were returning fire, but at 350 meters with AK-47s against an elevated position, their accuracy was negligible. Rounds cracked overhead or impacted the stone walls below her position, but none came particularly close to actual hits. Tessa ignored the incoming fire. Fear was counterproductive. Panic was fatal. She focused on the next target and the next, working through the Western group with mechanical efficiency. A fighter trying to provide covering fire for his advancing teammates. A man gesturing and clearly giving orders. Another fighter with an RPG. Western group is breaking contact, Torres called from his position in the main compound. They're withdrawing back to cover. You've got them spooked. Northern group is still advancing, Webb added. 350 meters and they don't seem to know we've engaged the others yet. Tessa shifted her attention to the north. This group was moving more cautiously through terrain that offered good concealment. They were approaching through a ravine that limited her sight lines. She could see glimpses of fighters moving between cover positions, but clean shots were difficult. She waited, patient, watching for opportunities. A fighter exposed himself, crossing an open section of the ravine. She took the shot and he went down. Another fighter stopped in a position he thought was concealed, but was actually visible from her elevated angle. Another shot, another target eliminated. The northern group had now realized they were under effective fire and had gone to ground, halted in positions 250 meters from the compound. They were no longer advancing, but they weren't withdrawing either. They'd become a fixed threat that she'd need to suppress. Southern group is reorganizing, Chen called out. Looks like they're bringing up more fighters and possibly vehicles. Tessa swung her scope back to the south. The initial group had been reinforced. She could now see what looked like 30 to 40 fighters at the tree line, with more arriving in pickup trucks. They were staying in cover, clearly having learned that exposing themselves meant getting shot. One of the vehicles, a technical with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, was positioning to provide fire support for another assault. The technical was a serious threat, capable of suppressing the entire compound with heavy, sustained fire. At 650 meters, shooting the gunner would be effective, but temporary. Someone else would just man the weapon. Tessa needed to disable the technical itself. She shifted her aim point from the gunner to the vehicle's engine block. The 300 Winchester Magnum round wouldn't destroy the engine, but it might damage it enough to take the vehicle out of action. She fired 3 rounds in rapid succession at the engine compartment. The technical's hood began billowing smoke. The vehicle was out of the fight, but the fighters were learning. They were keeping better cover, moving more carefully, no longer presenting easy targets. The southern group was preparing what looked like a coordinated assault, base of fire element to suppress the compound, while maneuver elements advanced from multiple directions. "Contact west," Santos called out. "They're trying to flank around our position. Estimate 10 fighters moving through the blind spot in your coverage." Tessa couldn't cover every angle simultaneously. The western flanking element was moving through terrain she couldn't observe from her current position. The team would have to deal with that threat with direct fire. She could hear the distinctive crack of M4 rifles as her teammates engaged the flanking element, the sound of AK-47 return fire, the metallic chunk of grenades being thrown, close quarters fighting that she couldn't support from her sniper position. "Western flankers repelled," Webb reported. 2 enemies down, rest withdrew, but they're going to try again. Southern group is advancing, Tessa reported, watching through her scope as approximately 25 fighters began bounding forward from cover to cover, using terrain and vegetation to mask their movement. They were executing a competent infantry assault, suppressing with machine gun fire, while riflemen advanced in short rushes. Tessa began engaging the advancing fighters with increased tempo. A man running between boulders, she led the target and fired, dropping him mid-stride. A fighter providing covering fire from behind a tree, she waited for him to expose himself for a shot and eliminated him when he did. A leader directing the assault, she prioritized him and took the shot despite difficult angle. Her rate of fire had increased to 1 shot every 4 to 6 seconds, fast by precision sniper standards, but necessary given the tactical situation. Each shot required target acquisition, range estimation, wind correction, and perfect trigger control. Each shot resulted in either a hit or a very near miss that caused the target to seek better cover. The Southern assault was stalling. They'd advanced maybe 50 meters before taking casualties that forced them to go to ground. The assault momentum had broken, but the respite was temporary. Tessa could see them reorganizing, bringing up more fighters, probably planning to mass enough force to overwhelm the position regardless of casualties. Northern group is advancing again, Torres warned. They're using the ravine as cover. I can barely see them. Tessa shifted to the north. The ravine approach was tactically sound. It offered excellent concealment and brought attackers to within 200 meters before they'd need to expose themselves for the final assault. But it also funneled them into a predictable route. I've got the ravine exit covered, Tessa transmitted. If they come out, I can engage. TS is still 20 minutes out, Chen reported, frustration evident in his voice. They're pushing as fast as they can, but we're a long way from their current position. 20 more minutes. Against an enemy force that was growing larger and more organized with each passing moment, the team had so far held the perimeter through a combination of Tessa's long-range fire and direct fire from the compound, but ammunition was finite, and the enemy seemed to have unlimited reinforcements. Fighters began emerging from the ravine exit, rushing toward the compound in groups of 3 to 4, trying to overwhelm Tessa's ability to engage them all. She worked the targets methodically, first fighter down, second fighter down, third fighter seeking cover, fourth fighter retreating back into the ravine. The next group of fighters tried the same approach. Same result, casualties and survivors retreating. They're testing us, Webb observed over the radio, trying to figure out our capabilities and fix our positions. The real assault is coming. He was right. The enemy commander was being smart, expending minimal forces on probing attacks to gather intelligence, preserving his main force for a coordinated assault once he understood the defense. South, West, and North groups are all getting reinforced, Tessa reported, watching through her scope as more vehicles arrived at the distant positions. I'm estimating 70-plus fighters now, possibly more I can't observe. The ammunition situation was becoming a concern. Tessa had started with 120 rounds. She'd fired approximately 35 shots so far, with roughly 30 confirmed hits and 5 near misses that had achieved suppression effects. That left 85 rounds for whatever was coming next. The sun was setting, which would complicate her effectiveness. The scope had illumination for low-light shooting, but target identification would become more difficult as darkness fell. The enemy probably knew this and would wait for darkness to launch their main assault. Be advised, enemy commanders probably waiting for dark, Tessa transmitted to the team. Once they can't see muzzle flash clearly and we lose some visual identification, they'll push hard. Agreed, Webb replied. We need to make this next 20 minutes count. When KS arrives, we'll need targets marked for immediate strikes. The wait was agonizing. Tessa maintained overwatch, watching as enemy positions consolidated and organized. She could see them positioning machine guns for fire support. She could see them organizing assault elements. She could see leaders moving between positions coordinating the attack. She engaged targets of opportunity when they presented themselves. A fighter who exposed himself too long, a machine gun team setting up in a position she could reach, leaders who made the mistake of standing to observe the compound. Each shot depleted her ammunition supply, but also delayed the enemy's assault preparation. Each casualty she inflicted was one fewer fighter they could commit to the attack. Each leader she eliminated disrupted their coordination. 10 minutes to CAS. The light was failing rapidly now, the sun dropping behind the western mountains and casting long shadows across the valley. Tessa switched to her scope's illuminated reticle, the faint red crosshairs providing aiming reference in the gathering darkness. "Movement south," she reported. "They're shifting positions, probably final assault preparations." "Movement north," Torres added. "Multiple fighters exiting the ravine. They're forming up at the exit point." "Movement west," Santos reported. "Looks like another flanking attempt, larger group this time." The coordinated assault was beginning, 3 directions simultaneously, probably with all remaining forces committed to overwhelming the position before air support could arrive. "All positions, weapons free, engage at will," Webb ordered. "Tessa, prioritize whatever threatens to break through. Everyone else, cover your assigned sectors. Fight smart and make your ammo count." The southern assault hit first. Approximately 25 fighters advancing with heavy fire support from machine guns positioned at the tree line. Tessa engaged the machine gun positions, trying to suppress them long enough for her teammates to deal with the advancing riflemen. Her shots forced the machine gunners to keep their heads down, reducing their rate of fire and accuracy. The M4 rifles from the compound cracked steadily as her teammates engaged advancing fighters. Grenades exploded as the enemy got close enough to throw them. The defensive fire was heavy but controlled, each shooter picking targets, managing ammunition, working to stop the assault. The northern assault emerged from the ravine, 15 to 20 fighters rushing toward the compound through terrain that offered minimal cover for the final 200 meters. This was the decisive moment. If they closed the distance, the defense would collapse into close quarters, fighting where the numerical advantage would tell. Tessa shifted her full attention to the northern assault. Her rate of fire increased to 1 shot every 3 seconds, working down the line of advancing fighters with mechanical precision. Target, range, wind, fire. Target, range, wind, fire. No hesitation, no wasted shots, just smooth execution of trained skills. The first fighter dropped at 180 meters, the second at 170, the third at 160. The advancing line was taking casualties faster than they could close the distance. The survivors went to ground at 140 meters, pinned by accurate fire. They couldn't escape. The western flanking attempt was hitting the compound's weakest point, the sector that neither Tessa nor the compound positions could cover effectively. Santos and Mitchell were fighting to hold that sector with grenades and short bursts of rifle fire. "West sector's getting pressed hard," Santos reported, breathing heavily between words. "Could use support." But Tessa couldn't help with the western sector from her position. She had to trust her teammates to hold that flank while she continued suppressing the other threats. The southern assault had been stopped 100 meters from the compound, the survivors taking cover and maintaining fire, but no longer advancing. The northern assault was pinned at 140 meters. The western assault was still pushing, but taking casualties from Santos and Mitchell's defensive fire. "CAS is 2 minutes out," Chen reported. "They need target locations for immediate strikes." Tessa quickly assessed the situation. The highest concentration of enemy forces was still at the southern tree line, where reinforcements and support weapons were positioned. That needed to be hit first, to prevent them from reinforcing the current assault or launching another one. "Priority target is tree line 600 meters south of compound," Tessa transmitted. "Estimate 25 to 30 fighters plus heavy weapons and vehicles. Secondary target is ridgeline 400 meters west. Estimate 15 fighters attempting to flank our position." "Copy, marking targets for CAS," Chen acknowledged. The sound of jet engines became audible. F-16s inbound at high speed. Tessa could see them approaching from the east, their silhouettes visible against the darkening sky. "Viper flight, this is Ground Team 1. We have troops in contact. Danger close, requesting immediate fire mission on marked coordinates," Chen was transmitting to the aircraft. "Ground Team 1, Viper 2-1, we copy, troops in contact, danger close, stand by for ordnance." The F-16s made their approach, vectoring toward the southern tree line where the main enemy force was positioned. Tessa watched through her scope as the aircraft released their ordnance, 500-pound GPS-guided bombs that tracked toward their targets with precision. The explosions were massive, lighting up the failing darkness with brilliant flashes that rolled across the tree line. Secondary explosions followed as vehicles and ammunition supplies detonated. The blast wave was visible even from 600 meters away, debris and smoke billowing into the evening sky. The southern assault position had been effectively destroyed. Any fighters who'd survived were fleeing from the destruction. The F-16s came around for a second pass, this time targeting the western ridgeline. More explosions, more devastation, more enemy positions obliterated by precision airstrikes. The fighters who'd been assaulting the compound from multiple directions were now retreating, breaking contact and withdrawing from an engagement they could no longer win. The arrival of air support had transformed the tactical situation from desperate defense to enemy rout. "All sectors, enemy is withdrawing," Webb transmitted. "Maintain observation but conserve ammunition." "Tessa, any threats still active?" Tessa scanned through her scope, checking each previous enemy position. The southern tree line was a burning wreck. The western ridgeline was cratered and smoking. The northern ravine exit was empty, the assault force having withdrawn back into the ravine and presumably continuing to withdraw from there. "No active threats visible," Tessa reported. "I'm seeing scattered movement of individuals withdrawing to the east and south, but no organized groups and no offensive posture." "CAS is remaining on station for the next 30 minutes, Chen added. "They're available for additional strikes if needed and will provide overwatch during our extraction." The extraction helicopter arrived 25 minutes later, touching down in a clearing 200 meters from the compound, while the F-16s circled overhead, maintaining surveillance of the surrounding area. The team collapsed their defensive position, gathered their equipment and sensitive materials, and moved to the helicopter under the protective overwatch of the orbiting aircraft. As the helicopter lifted off, Tessa looked down at the battlefield. The southern tree line was still burning. The compound that had been their defensive position looked small and vulnerable from this altitude. The valley that had nearly become their grave was disappearing into the darkness below. She'd fired 87 rounds during the engagement. She'd achieved 73 confirmed eliminations or suppressions. She'd prevented multiple assault attempts from overwhelming the position. She'd kept her team alive through the longest 40 minutes of her combat career. "Hell of a job up there, Rivera," Webb said over the helicopter's internal communications, his voice carrying exhaustion and genuine respect. "Without your overwatch, they'd have overrun us in the first 10 minutes. You just saved 6 lives tonight." "Just doing my job, sir," Tessa replied, her voice carrying the same exhaustion. "Your job was holding off 60-plus fighters for 40 minutes while outnumbered 10-1, Torres interjected. "That's not just anything. That's exceptional performance under the worst possible conditions." The other team members added their agreement. They'd all seen what she'd done, understood how close they'd come to being overwhelmed, recognized that one person with a rifle had been the difference between survival and catastrophe. The helicopter flew toward Bagram, carrying 6 operators who'd survived an engagement they shouldn't have walked away from. Behind them, enemy forces were still withdrawing from a valley where they had expected an easy victory, and instead had encountered a Navy SEAL sniper who proved that numbers don't matter when you're facing someone who never misses. 3 days later, Tessa sat in a debriefing room at Bagram answering questions from intelligence officers who wanted to understand every detail of the engagement. The enemy force had been larger than initially estimated. Intercepts suggested approximately 90 fighters had been committed to the assault, with 47 confirmed casualties directly attributable to Tessa's sniper fire, and another dozen casualties from her teammates' defensive fire. The enemy commander had apparently been one of the casualties. Tessa's shot that had eliminated the man directing the southern assault had taken out a mid-level Taliban commander whose death was now being reported in intelligence channels. The enemy's assessment, based on intercepts of their communications, is that they encountered a much larger force than 6 personnel, the intelligence officer explained. They're reporting to their leadership that they assaulted a position defended by at least 20 to 30 coalition fighters. They can't conceptualize that one sniper was responsible for the majority of their casualties. "Good," Webb interjected. "Let them think we're stronger than we are. Makes them more cautious." After the formal debriefing ended, Webb pulled Tessa aside. There's talk of recommending you for a Silver Star for actions during the engagement. Your performance was that far above expected standards. I was just doing what I was trained to do, sir. We're all trained. Not all of us can perform like you did under that level of pressure. Webb's expression was serious. You held off a force 10 times our size for 40 minutes, eliminated nearly 50 enemy combatants, and prevented our position from being overrun. That's not training. That's exceptional skill and courage under fire. Tessa didn't know what to say to that. She'd done what needed to be done. She'd made the shots that mattered. She'd kept her teammates alive. Wasn't that what being a SEAL was supposed to be about? 6 months later, Tessa stood in dress uniform at a ceremony where she received the Silver Star for valor in combat. The citation read in part, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an enemy of the United States while serving as a sniper with a Navy SEAL element engaged in combat operations." Petty Officer Rivera's exceptional marksmanship, tactical acumen, and unwavering courage under intense enemy fire were directly responsible for preventing her team's position from being overrun by numerically superior hostile forces. The medal was heavy in her hand. The ceremony was formal and respectful. The senior officers who pinned the medal to her uniform understood what it represented, not just one engagement, but years of training and dedication that culminated in 40 minutes where every shot mattered and mistakes meant death. But what Tessa remembered most wasn't the medal ceremony or the formal recognition. It was the moment 3 days after the engagement when the team had gathered informally, and Torres had raised his coffee cup in a toast. "To the best damn sniper in the Navy," he had said, "who proved that one person with a rifle and the skill to use it can beat any odds." The team had echoed the toast, and in that moment, Tessa had understood something important. Awards and medals were nice. Recognition from senior leadership was appreciated. But what really mattered was the respect of the people who'd been there, who'd seen what she could do, who trusted her to keep them alive when everything went to hell. She'd been outnumbered 10-1. She'd faced enemy forces that should have overwhelmed her position. She'd had 40 minutes to either perform at a level most snipers never achieved or watch her teammates die. She'd chosen to perform. Shot by shot, target by target, elimination by elimination. 47 enemy combatants had discovered that numbers don't determine outcomes. Skill does. Training does. The absolute refusal to accept defeat does. Tessa Rivera had been a Navy SEAL sniper facing impossible odds in a remote valley that most people would never hear about, in an engagement that would remain classified for years, doing a job that most people couldn't imagine. And she'd proven something that every great sniper knows. When your teammates' lives depend on your performance, when the odds are stacked against you, when everything is falling apart, that's when training becomes instinct, when skill becomes art, when one person with a rifle can change the outcome of an entire battle. The enemy had been outnumbered. They just didn't know it until it was too late. Because they weren't fighting 6 SEALs, they were fighting 5 SEALs, and Tessa Rivera with a sniper rifle. And that had made all the difference. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories every day.